Okay, so thanks very much, Bernard. So the framework for what we're doing is a doctoral school in Durham in April, which is part of the Real Smart Cities project that we have. And part of what we're doing in Durham is looking at the construction of a methodology around digital studies, and with the objective of perhaps putting together a toolkit around digital studies. So perhaps the first thing I could ask you is a toolkit. Perhaps the first question I could ask is, what is digital studies, or what are the aims of digital studies?
Okay. First, I would like to say that digital means digits, fingers first. This is what is these fingers are part of an organ that is hand, and it's on the fingers that we count. Now, of course, when we talk about what we call digital studies, it is about what is called digital technology. And we consider that it is extremely important today to create doctoral schools of digital studies, but higher education in digital studies, research in digital studies, etc., in all kinds of disciplines, because the digital is changing everything in knowledge, in all kinds of knowledge, not only academic knowledge, but also everyday life knowledge. So the idea is that there are epistemological statements behind this position, but before the epistemological statements, we have also to describe the context. As you know, for let's say 10 or 15 years, digital humanities were increasing in universities, for example in France, at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, CNRS, etc. It was created a manifesto for digital humanities, but it is also the case in many other universities, countries, in Germany, in Switzerland, Europe, in London, in UK, in America, etc., of course, in Japan. Now we consider that in the digital studies network that this paradigm of digital humanities is necessary, it's very important, but not sufficient, because we consider that the question is not only to understand how it is possible to develop, for example, tools for analysis of data in history or in literature, etc. It is extremely important, of course, but it's not only a question of tools. It is a question of, I would like to say, schematization. And when I say schematization, I mean that it is a question of Kant in Critique of Purism that we have to reopen. But before developing this point, I would like to add that the context of increasing of digital technologies in the university, in science, in everyday life, etc., etc., is completely upsetting or disrupting mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, everything, absolutely everything. So I agree completely when, for example, Clarisse Ehrenschmidt says that the digital is a new form of writing, that she called that a reticulated writing, form of writing. We can discuss this definition, reticulated or not. It's not a problem. But let's say, yes, it is a new kind of writing. Now, what is writing? It is a kind of what I call myself a tertiary retention. And a tertiary retention is, this is a tertiary retention. An artificial object is a tertiary retention. That is, it is a beginning of exosomatization, that is a production of artificial organs. This is an organ for protecting my neck, because I'm not an animal, and I need to protect my neck in winter with that, and I need to have a table to etc., etc. We are living in such an exosomatic milieu, and it is the case for all kind of human being. But now we are discovering that it is also this exosomatic milieu, as it produces what I call hypomnesic tertiary retentions. I use the term hypomnesic in the sense in which Derrida used it after Socrates, quoting Socrates about what he's writing as a pharmacon. It tells a hypomnesic pharmacon. Now, these hypomnesic tertiary retentions have become the core of industry.
And would you say that's what's particular about the numeric?
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
capacity?
Yes.
So when we talk about digital, and we say our digits, our fingers, etc., there's something very specific about this form of tertiary retention.
Yes, exactly. And here we have to first analyze in the new political economy what is the status of these tertiary tensions, hypomnesic digital hypomnesic tertiary tensions in the contemporary society, economy, politics, etc. It was the topic of the symposium we had for two days, yesterday and today, and for tomorrow. But now we have also to address this question, to revisit completely the question of epistemology from such a point of view, passing through Derrida, for reopening the question of the critique of pure reason. When I say that, I mean that I believe that if we want to overcome what is called by Marx, for example, German idealism, and what is called by Heidegger and Derrida metaphysics, we have to reopen the question that was opened by, for example, Alfred von Rettel, a Marxist philosopher from the Frankfurt School, who claimed that we have to continue what was opened by Marx when he said that we must struggle against German idealism. We must show that, for example, metaphysics is a relationship of social reports, of social domination, etc. And he said, for example, the philosophers were the people representing the nobles of the Greek society and exploiting the slaves, etc., etc. And he says we must understand that, for example, that the process of digitization, not in the sense of digital technologies today, but of the development of arithmetics, etc., was dedicated to the exploitation of slaves and to creation of money that was created in I don't remember exactly the name in English, the kings of Lydia, I think it is Lydia, let's say 2 centuries before Athens civilization. And he says it was because of this social technology that was money, currencies, that mathematics, etc., became the core of the social organization of the Greeks. Actually, I disagree with this view. When I say that I disagree, I don't completely disagree, but I think it's extremely a very small view of the problem, because I think that the question is not simply to understand how currency, etc., made possible an exploitation, social relationship, social domination, etc., etc. It is the role of tertiary retention into knowledge, in the constitution of knowledge. And here we have to go back to Kant. Personally, I tried to show in the 3rd volume of Techniques and Time that there's a problem in the critique of pure reason. First, it was addressed, this problem, by Heidegger in Kant and the Problem of Metaphysics, when he said, between the first edition of 1782 and 1787, between the two editions, there was a transformation of, particularly in the beginning of Critique of Purism, and the suppression of a question of transcendental imagination that was replaced by understanding. Here I follow for almost everything what is said by Heidegger about this question on Kant, and I consider that, of course, Heidegger is extremely strong in this interpretation and in this problem of the coherence of the thought of Kant, but nevertheless, I say we must go beyond. Because the question of what I called previously tertiary retention was avoided by Heidegger himself in Sein und Zeit. At the end of Sein und Zeit, he had an hesitation between paragraph 75, 76. Should we include Weltgeschichtlichkeit into the originary time? And at the end he said no. So he had a kind of hypothesis for two paragraphs that it could be possible to go beyond Husserl about this question of retention, primary and secondary retention. It doesn't address these terms. He never uses these terms, but it is what is behind what he says in Sein und Zeit, because the year before publishing Sein und Zeit, he published the lessons of phenomenology of consciousness of time with Edith Stein in German. So he was completely into this question of time by Husserl. And I am convinced that Sein und Zeit is a kind of reply to the lessons of time, phenomenology of time. Now, himself, he rejected the question of what I call myself tertiary retentions. And I tried to show that Husserl addressed himself the question in The Origin of Geometry, after, 10 years after the Sein und Zeit. But I will not develop that. I just want to say that here that if we try to go beyond what is said by Heidegger, what is said by Heidegger? He showed that the three syntheses of imagination in the first edition, that are apprehension, reproduction, and recognition, are the forms of primary retention, secondary retention, and protension. He doesn't say that exactly in these terms, but it is what he shows. So, and it is extremely clear and convincing. Now, for me, there is a tertiary retention, not only primary and secondary retention and protension, but tertiary retentions. And here I try to show that if we don't address this question, we cannot understand what is the question of schematization. And here I try to show that when Immanuel Kant said, for example, when you produce the concept of five, of course you can use the image of five, cinq, cinque, fünf, etc., in different language. He says there are empirical images, but the concept is transcendental. And he continues by claiming that it is the same with 1000, and it is completely wrong. Because 1000, first, you cannot have an apprehension of 1000 like 5. It is extremely difficult to apprehend what is 1000, to understand what is it. And the question is here, the constitution of the concept of understanding are based on what I call tertiary retentions, that are, for example, systems of numeration. So I will not develop that, but I just say that because it is the basis of what I call digital studies. Digital studies try to address these questions with Hegel, with Kant, with Hegel, because these questions are extremely important in Hegel. Hegel was the first thinker of the process of exteriorization. He said Geist is a process of exteriorization. This is extremely important. This is the reason for which Marx was a reader of Hegel. And after that, Marx himself, who said the process of exteriorization is not simply a moment of the spirit, of the Geist. It is a process of production of means of production. And here he opened the question of what I call exosomatization. Now, these questions are completely readdressed by digital technologies, big data, artificial intelligence, digital humanities, etc., etc. Everything is changed. Why? Because what is called by Kant the low faculties of intuition, understanding, imagination, and reason are upsetted by the evolution of the contemporary digital tertiary attentions. And if we cannot revisit this question of epistemology and of episteme, I use epistemology in the sense of Bachelard. Bachelard opened the question of what he called phenomenotechnology, phenomenotechnics. And I use also episteme in the sense of Foucault, because Foucault opened some questions with archives, etc., around this question. If we don't address that by revisiting not only Kant, but Descartes, I tried to show that in the book on the description. For example, in the Regulae, Descartes says, rules 16 and 17, he says, science is first reading, and second, writing. So if we don't address the question of writing, we cannot understand what are the questions of reason. And it's incredible, because I tried to show that in the controversy between Foucault and Derrida concerning madness, the status of madness in Descartes, they never address this question, because they are not capable to understand that Descartes himself was already addressing the question of writing. I think it is extremely important, this question. And it was also a question, of course, for which Leibniz had interest, for example, for Chinese writing as the basis of his characteristica universalis, etc., etc. Now I consider that we have to go to the origin of philosophy, that is to Socrates, and to the question of the pharmakon. If I say that, it is because, for me, digital studies is a contemporary field of what I call organology and pharmacology. And I know that you wanted me to address the question of methodology.
Yes.
And I will try to address this question of methodology by this question of organology and pharmacology. And here, there is also a question for Gerald about Derrida and deconstruction, etc. Maybe we'll try also to address this question. What I call with Ars Industrialis for almost 15 years now, general organology is a methodology. Of course, there are positive statements. Particularly, we claim that the human being is organological, that is exosomatic. It is the same question here. But it is, when you say that, it is not a philosophical positive statement. It is only a point of departure, like it was the case for Marx and Engels in the German ideology, from which you will reinterpret everything. And now I add, because I read 3 years ago Alfred Lotka, who was for me an extremely important biologist, who addressed this question of exosomatization as such from the point of view of a biologist. But I will not develop that now. When I say that general organology is a methodology, it is in the sense where I claim that a philosopher has nothing to claim positively about general organology, but a question of methodology. When I say methodology, it is also in the sense of method, as it is addressed by Heidegger, by Descartes, but also Heidegger, where Heidegger says methodos, that is, how do you say that, to walk. In French we say cheminer, that is walking in a path. And creating the path by walking in the path, it is philosophy. I completely agree with Heidegger. about this definition of what is philosophy. It is methods. It is methodos, as it says. That is walking on a path. Now, such a methodos here is based on the idea that if you want to address, let's say, scientifically, rationally, I don't know, politically, a question concerning human beings, I prefer to say noetic souls, because I don't like to refer to the human. You must always keep into account, in your attention, you must always pay attention about first the endosomatic organs that are necessary for making possible the phenomenon you are studying. Mm-hmm. Second, the exosomatic organs and the system in which they are included, because an exosomatic organ is never alone, it is always in a relation with many other exosomatic organs, and the social organizations in which there are prescriptions produced concerning the practice of these exosomatic organs by those endosomatic organs, your brain, your hands, etc., etc. And this, if we address these three levels, we can address the question of tertiary attention. Mm-hmm. And we can do that not as a philosopher, but with biologists, with mathematicians, mm-hmm. with historians of technology, etc., etc. So it is a kind of contract between the partnership created knowledge in an episteme. Mm. Because an episteme is a kind of partnership between diverse kinds of knowledge. Theoretical knowledge, academic knowledge, but also everyday life knowledge, or spiritual knowledge, etc., etc. The other question is the pharmacology. What is specific, what makes the difference between endosomatic organs and exosomatic organs is that endosomatic organs are necessarily spontaneously negentropic. Sometimes they produce entropy, but it is the case when there is a dysfunctioning, when there is a disease, a problem, an illness, etc., etc.
Could I ask you the question, because we've spoken quite a lot about it over the last 2 days, but it might be worthwhile just trying to make a distinction between entropy and negentropy.
Yes, it is a very complex question, a very polemical question, because there is no global agreement on this question, for example, between physicists, in thermodynamics, biologists, and computer scientists. Also what is called theory of complexity, theory of dissipative structures, etc., etc. Many other theories in this field. There is an incredible disagreement. Mm. For example, when it was showed by Mathieu Triclot, is a French philosopher, a specialist of these questions precisely. He published a very interesting book. I recommend to translate it in English. He showed very clearly that Shannon used negentropy in a sense that is the contrary of the understanding of negentropy by Wiener. Okay. And it is extremely difficult to use these terms because there are many quiproquos. One of these quiproquos comes from the fact that in the theory of information, for example, what justifies the use of the concept of entropy and negentropy is a formalism of probabilities. Hartley constant is the same like Boltzmann constant, and Boltzmann it is in the field of physics, Hartley it is in the field of information, and this is here the definition here of entropy is produced by the constant, by the mathematization of probabilities. Myself, I don't define that in this way. I consider that we have to distinguish first between 4 types of entropy. The first one is thermodynamics, that is the dissipation of heat, of energy. That was discovered during the 19th century. The second is the process of destruction of biodiversity. Because the question of entropy was introduced in questions of biology by Erwin Schrödinger, who was a physicist, but who tried to understand what is life. This is the title of lecture he gave in Dublin, and in 1944. And his definition of entropy here is the object against which life is struggling. That is disorganization. With Schrödinger, entropy becomes disorganization. Not only dissipation of energy. Disorganization is dissipation of energy, but it is not only dissipation of energy. It is destruction of life. And the third definition is entropy in information. That is the destruction of the value of information, of the capacity, of the potentiality of information, because information is only a potentiality for information. Now myself, I add a fourth definition, that is what I call entropy, the A and H. And this is what is addressed, for example, by the IPCC in the report 2014, when they say there are anthropogenic forcings. And those anthropogenic forcings are destroying the biosphere. This is the action of the human that destroys the biosphere. This is the fourth definition of entropy, but it is written with A and H. And this is the reason for which I say that, from my point of view, digital studies is necessarily leading to what I call a neganthropology. Now, the question of negantropy is the main question for humankind, but not only for humankind, for life and for the biosphere, is the next 50 years. If we are not capable to solve these problems in the next 50 years, life will disappear. Maybe not all forms of life, but high forms of life will disappear. This is what is said by all the scientists today. Not all of them, but almost all of them. So this is the stake of digital studies is this question. Why? Because what is digital technology? It is a pharmacon. And as a pharmacon, like every kind of exosomatic organ, it can produce an increasing of negantropy. For example, Newton is an increasing of negantropy. Jesus Christus is an increasing of negantropy. Socrates, Henry Ford, etc. But it is also an increasing of entropy. And knowledge, in such a view, is what I call a therapeia. That is a capacity to transform the potential for producing entropy into a potential for producing negantropy. What is such a negantropy? It is a bifurcation. And what is a bifurcation? It is knowledge. This is the reason for which I refer to Whitehead. Because I consider Whitehead is not really a neo-Kantian philosopher, but he refers always to two philosophers in the tradition who are Plato and Kant. And I consider that what he does with Kant is very important, because he tries to reinterpret this philosophy from in a point of view that is the point of view of what he called concrescence and processuality. And here he addresses the question of entropy, that is not only a question of dissipation of energy, but of the processual evolution of the universe. This is the reason for which he addresses also the question of speculative cosmology. Here, I think Sarah would have many things to say.
Just on, because it came up in some of the discussion today, and you used an expression which I found very interesting, that work produces neg entropy. I was wondering, could you explain that relationship between work and neg entropy, particularly in the context that we're in here in Pleine Commune?
Okay. Now, first, I will repeat what I said just 1 hour before.
Yeah.
When I say work, it is not work in the sense of the physicists, for example. When they say, for example, the steam machine works. No, the steam machine doesn't work at all. The steam machine produces an energy, a force, etc. This force was produced before by laborers, so it is called work, but it is not work, properly speaking. It is force, a physical force. Now, what I call work is not employment, it is not labor. Work is œuvre. It is a possibility to open something that is that tend to become closed. And a worker is the one who is always reopening something that tend to become closed. And a worker can be everybody who is producing something new in the world. As a footballer, as a mother, as a priest, as a Picasso, as Einstein, and as a manual worker who is not a proletarian. This is a problem, and I insist here because in UK particularly, I had many problems with English Marxists with that. When I said the question is a question of proletarian, but of proletariats and proletarians, but it is a question of going beyond laborers and readdressing the question of work. They couldn't understand at all this question, because when you say that the powerful of the negative is not the question. So we must abandon the materialist dialectic, for example. And it's very, very difficult to make this clear for people coming from the Marxist tradition, particularly in England. Now, I believe that we have to completely redefine what is work today, because work is what creates bifurcations. Opening is always creating a bifurcation, even if it is a very small one. For example, a new play of a footballer that is completely new in the history of football. This is what makes a champion. And it is the case for everything. Educating a child, for example, is always to produce something completely new, because all children are different. And you have always to deal with singularity, with something that is irreducible to generality, to universality, etc. etc. So, and this is the reason also for which desire is extremely important in that. Now, my definition of work is the capacity to produce bifurcations in every kind of human activity. Now, generally, we call that knowledge. And I recall that for Marx, proletarianization was a loss of knowledge. And today, because of robotization, automation, etc., etc., all the proletarianized jobs will be replaced with robots in the next 20 years. And maybe not all of them, but an important part of them. And we have to create, to reevaluate what is work. The question is not now what is labor, because now labor is machinism. The question is what is work, and how could we reorganize an industrial society around this question. And this is the stake of the Anthropocene. Now this is also the stake of digital studies. Because if we go back to, for example, the status of big data or artificial intelligence, it is extremely important to show that these technologies that are extremely powerful, magnificent, extremely interesting. I love technology myself, really. But they are pharmaca. And if we are not capable to reinscribe the question, for example, of big data into the question of the low faculty of understanding that was opened by Kant, and revisiting that with the concept of what I call tertiary attention, as it is a condition of evolution of that, we will necessarily produce a negative pharmacology. So the aim of digital studies is to produce therapeutics, for example, in smart cities. We can reject smart cities because they are automatic cities, destroying completely citizenship, for example, or urbanity. But we must not reject, we must appropriate, we must adopt that for producing new models of socialization of these technologies, not the one of the smart cities, as IBM promoted that. And it is absolutely possible, and it is the stake of the project of Pleine Commune.
One last question, okay? Because it came up in what you said a moment ago in relation to knowledge and work. Could I ask you to make a distinction between competences and knowledge?
You should have the question to Anne. she will answer much better than me, but I will try to answer that nevertheless. As she said, knowledge is always a process of individuation. When you know something, and when you operate your knowledge, when you activate your knowledge, you transform your knowledge, and you transform yourself with the knowledge, and the knowledge in itself, and the world in which this knowledge is a knowledge, etc., etc. A competence is different. You need competence for activating knowledge, of course, but it's completely different. It's procedural. So you have a procedure, and you must apply it automatically. For example, learning, we say how to read, how to write, it is automatic. You must automatize yourself. It is only also learning a language, for example. If you cannot automatize for example, to say, I don't know, I would like to find a good example. Yes, I say, in America, when you meet a friend, it's good to see you. But for me, as a French, it's good to see you. I translate it in French. C'est bon de te voir. It's stupid to say that in French. So it was very difficult for me. I needed 10 years in America for saying, yes, it's good to see you. But it became an automatism, not a constant linguistic behavior. You know? And this is a competence. Now, to have a knowledge of English or American English, it's not the same. You must create something with English. For example, this is the stake of Benjamin Lee Worth in Linguistic Anthropology, when he said, I tried to grammatize Hopi language, because I tried to show that the sentence in Hopi has no time, for example, like in Latin, etc., etc. And I produced a modelization of that, a grammar of Hopi, and when I tried to show that to the Hopi people, they laughed. They said, it's completely stupid. It's impossible. Language is produced by spirits. It processes you, and when you speak, it's not you who speaks, it's spirits. So it's impossible what you say. And myself, I said, Benjamin Lee Worth could not create anything in Hopi with the Hopis. Because if you want to create something in Hopi language, you must appropriate this understanding of Hopi language. So, and it is possible, of course, because an anthropologist can become fluently speaking Hopi and a producer of new dimensions of Hopi, etc. So, today, we have to re-evaluate what is knowledge and what are the competencies we need for this knowledge. But the competencies are means, and means that are necessarily automatic. Now the question today is dis-automatization, because this is what is made possible by bifurcations, by knowledge, etc., etc. And we have to completely redefine, I will say, the function of universities, of schools, of education, because they have functions, of course. I said at the beginning of this symposium, I have now a neo-functionalist position. And I consider that we have to revindicate that. We have to claim that if you have a point of view, if you understand what is human life from the point of view of exosomatization, necessarily you have a new functionalist definition of everything. This is what I said when I said that knowledge is what gives you the possibility to take care of a pharmacon and to produce not entropy but negentropy. And this is also the reason for which I refer to Whitehead, because when he said reason is a function, this is what I try to say too.
Okay.
Voilà.
That's great. Merci.
On va s'arrêter là. Merci à toi. On va manger.